Mississippi, 1851. By the end of summer, Beaumont Place held a kind of heat that made even the dogs stop barking. The air clung to skin like thick syrup. Cicadas shrieked from the trees until the sound blurred in your head. Eliza moved through all of it the way she always had. Quiet, steady, careful with her hands, careful with her speech, careful where she let her eyes rest. She had grown up on this land. She could walk from the quarters to the big house in full darkness without tripping once. She knew which board on the kitchen porch would groan before her foot touched it. She could tell the sound of far thunder from the roll of a wagon long before the sky made up its mind. At 23, she belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. To the others in bondage, she was Lisa from the house, the one who passed along messages, slipped out leftovers, murmured warnings when trouble was coming. To the overseer, she was that house girl, useful enough to keep around, not important enough to learn. To the ledgers locked inside Mr. Beaumont's desk, she was only ink on a page. Eliza, female, age about 23, house servant. The only place she was not someone else's property to read was inside her own mind. In there, she carried a past that could never fit on a single line. She remembered her mother's low hum while braiding her hair at night. She remembered auction days in town, how voices shifted when people turned into prices. She remembered the day Mrs. Beaumont noticed she had grown tall and pretty and said, "We'll move you into the house. Your hands are made for finer work." Eliza went from scrubbing troughs to shining silver, from hauling buckets to pouring coffee. She learned the exact way Mrs. Beaumont wanted her napkins folded, the precise number of sugar lumps each guest preferred without ever asking. She also learned something else. The less seen she made herself, the safer she felt. She became skilled at disappearing until the night he stopped calling her girl. It was the summer after Mrs. Beaumont left. Some said she had gone to Charleston to see a sick sister. Others whispered she herself was sick. Sick of the heat, sick of debt stacking up on her husband's desk, sick of watching her beauty fade faster than the paint on the parlor walls. Whatever the truth, the house felt wrong without her. Silence settled into the corners, thick and waiting. That night Eliza was clearing the dining room after a late supper. Mr. Beaumont sat alone at the head of the table, collar loosened, vest undone. The lamp between them threw a yellow pool of light that made his tired face look more worn. An open ledger rested by his elbow, numbers crawling across the page like ants. A near-empty bottle of whiskey sat beside it. He barely spoke during the meal. Fork up, fork down, eyes on the ink instead of the food. Eliza moved around him, gathering plates, wiping a smear of gravy from the cloth with practiced care. "Leave it," he said suddenly. She froze, cloth still in her hand. "Sir." He stared at the spot beneath her fingers as if noticing it for the first time. "I said leave it," he repeated. "No sense cleaning small stains when the whole house is one." "Never mind," she said, straightening, unsure whether to apologize or slip back to the kitchen. Every rule in her bones told her not to be noticed, but his voice carried a rough edge that made ignoring him feel unsafe. "Would you like more coffee, sir?" she asked. "Or sit," he cut in. Her heart skipped. "Sir, I said sit." Eliza, he had never spoken her name like that before. Usually it was "Girl," or "You there," or Lisa shouted down the hall. Hearing the full name, quiet and almost gentle, unsettled her more than shouting ever had. She sat slowly in a chair halfway down the table, perched on the edge as if ready to run. He poured another drink, then paused. "You want some?" Her eyes widened. "No, sir." He gave a short laugh. "Right. Forgot. Master's drink and slave's lips aren't meant to mix." He swallowed and winced. "Funny, when you think of what else gets mixed under this roof." Her stomach tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. She had seen pale-skinned children on nearby plantations, heard the names whispered when people thought no one was listening. "I don't understand, sir," she said, lying. "Yes, you do," he replied, studying her face. "You have your mother's eyes." She always knew more than was safe. Eliza clenched her hands in her lap. Her mother had died 3 summers earlier, taken fast by fever. The memory still felt like a bruise pressed too often. "I remember you as a child," he continued. "Hiding under this table when my friends came over. Thought if you made yourself small no one could see you." "I was just playing," she said quickly. "You were surviving," he said. The room felt tight. The lamp hissed softly. Outside a cricket sang without pause. "Why am I here, sir?" Eliza asked at last. "Did I do something wrong with supper?" He laughed, sharp and bitter. "If you had, you'd be on the other side of my temper." His eyes flicked to the corner where a whip once hung like decoration before Mrs. Beaumont made him move it to the barn. "You did everything right. That's the trouble." She did not know how to answer that. He leaned back, looking at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "My wife isn't coming back this month," he said. "Maybe not the next. The doctor said sea air was good for her nerves." He made the word sound foul. "Meanwhile, I'm here with an empty house and a desk full of bills." Eliza shifted. The mention of Mrs. Beaumont sent a chill through her. Whatever this was, she did not want the mistress's shadow in it. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. He watched her a moment longer. "Stand up," he said. Her legs moved before she could think. "Turn around." She did that too because there was no other choice. She turned slowly, aware of his gaze moving over her like a hand. He was not ugly. Not old enough to be her grandfather, too old to be young. Somewhere along the way, he had crossed that line without noticing. "You move quieter than any woman I've known," he said. "The house works better when you're in it. Fires lit on time, coffee hot, shirts pressed. No complaints about heat or dust or neighbors." He stood, his chair scraping the floor. "Come here, Eliza." Her mouth went dry. "Sir, it's late." "I should." He stepped closer. Whiskey, sweat, and faint soap wrapped around her. "I'm tired of sleeping alone in a big empty bed," he said. "I could find someone in town, like everyone else. But I don't want strangers. I want someone who knows where the cups are, who won't chatter at breakfast." Her pulse roared in her ears. "You're a good woman," he said. "You keep my house like it's yours. You might as well keep my nights too." Words pressed against her lips. She did not want this. He already owned her. This was not a choice. None of it ever was. She thought of the overseer's whip. She thought of her little brother asleep 3 cabins away. Of what could happen to him if she angered this man. She thought of the law that named people like her as property, as bodies to be used, as things that could not be violated because they could not refuse. "I don't understand," she said weakly, though she did. He softened his tone as if this were fair talk. "I'm not asking you to be my wife," he said. "The law will never see you that way. But in this house, in this room, when I call, you can be my second wife." The words hung there, ugly and tender all at once. "You'll stay in the house," he continued. "You'll eat better than field hands. If you have children, they'll stay close. I won't sell them for the first good price. I'm not a monster, Eliza. I'm a man trying to hold his world together." His world, not hers. She remembered Lahi the midwife whispering once, "If a white man calls you special, run. If you can't run, hide. If you can't hide." There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, only the mask. "What if I say no?" she asked, because some small burning part of her would not let the question die. His eyes hardened, the softness vanished. "Then I send you back to the fields," he said, "or sell you south, or make life hard for your people. You won't be anyone's second. You'll just be another body I once fed." He stepped back, giving what he thought was space. "I'm offering you a better place in a bad world," he said. "That's more than most men offer." The room tilted. Eliza felt the moment when her choices narrowed into a single thin path. It was not consent. It was survival wearing borrowed words. She lowered her head. "Yes," she whispered. He let out a long breath as if a heavy weight had lifted. Not from her. "Good," he said. "We understand each other. No need to talk more tonight." He brushed her cheek with his fingers like she was something fragile he had paid dearly for. "Go to my room," he said. "Put out the lamp. I'll come shortly." She walked down the hall on legs that felt soon not her own, past Mrs. Beaumont's portrait above the stairs. The painted eyes watched her, cold and empty. That was the night the house changed. In the quarters, people noticed when Eliza stopped sleeping in her old bunk. They noticed the better dress, the way she came to the yard less. The shadows that began to settle under her eyes held something that had nothing to do with kitchen work. In the big house, Mr. Beaumont slept more soundly, woke with calmer moods, and called her Eliza more often, girl less. He began to say we when he spoke about the house. "We keep this place running. We keep the books straight. We can manage without my wife for a while." He stopped saying my wife as if it meant the woman in Charleston. Months went by. What they had turned into a strange kind of normal. And then one morning, when the air tasted like rain and regret, a letter arrived. The seal was broken, the writing short and neat. "I am returning on the 1st of next month. Margaret Beaumont." Eliza did not see the letter, but she saw Mr. Beaumont's hand shake as he read it. She heard the way he said, "Well, that's that." He did not look at her. Still, she felt the house tighten, as if the walls themselves understood. The woman whose name was on everything was coming back, and second wife was not a place that survived once the first one stepped through the door again. Margaret Beaumont returned the same way she had left, in a fine carriage with trunks tied behind it and a letter that arrived 2 days too late. The sky that day was pale and washed out, and the road from town threw dust over everything that moved. Eliza stood on the front steps with the other servants, clean dress, pressed apron, hands folded so tight her knuckles ached. Beside her, the butler tugged at his collar, and the houseboy shifted from one foot to the other. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. The carriage stopped. The driver jumped down and opened the door with a small flourish he had practiced in Charleston. Mrs. Beaumont stepped out, one gloved hand resting on his arm. She was thinner than Eliza remembered. The sharp bones of her face showed more clearly now. Time away had shaped her into something harder, more exact. Where there had once been softness, there was now edge. "Eliza," she said, like she was checking off a list, not greeting a person. Eliza said, dipping into a small curtsy. Mrs. Beaumont's eyes passed over her quickly, measuring everything, the fabric of the dress, the way Eliza's hands were smoother now, the faint darkness under her eyes. She noted it all without changing her face. "The house looks settled," she said. The pause before the words said more than the words themselves. "Me kept it as you left it," Mr. Beaumont said from the porch. He had come out smiling, but as his wife drew closer, the smile tightened into something careful. He leaned in to kiss her cheek. She turned just enough that his lips brushed her jaw instead. "I can tell," she said. "You didn't move a thing." She did not only mean the furniture. She meant the habits. She meant the way she could feel that another rhythm had lived inside these walls while she was gone. Eliza carried the trunks upstairs. In the master bedroom, the dust covers had been pulled away that morning, the mattress beaten, the linens changed. Still, signs of another life lingered. A faint dip in the bed, a hair caught in the seam of the pillow, the way the nightstand held space for 2 cups instead of 1. "You can set that there," Mrs. Beaumont said, pointing to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "No, not there. There it scratches the floor if you slide it too close to the wall." Eliza shifted the trunk by an inch. Mrs. Beaumont watched, then walked to the wardrobe and opened it. Dresses hung inside, spaced with the careful order of a woman who believed control was half of survival. She ran her hand along the hangers, counting silently, noticing the one that sat just slightly out of place. "Has anyone been in my things?" she asked. Eliza swallowed. "I folded everything back how I found it." "And how did you find it?" Margaret asked. Eliza paused, sensing the trap. "Neat," she said. "Like now." A small smile touched the corner of Mrs. Beaumont's mouth. "You always were quick," she said. "That's why I asked Thomas to bring you into the house in the first place." The way she said his name, Thomas, reminded Eliza that Mrs. Beaumont had known him before the ledgers, before the bottles, before he ever spoke of seconds. For the next few days, the house settled into a tight new order. Mrs. Beaumont took her place again like a queen reclaiming a warmed throne. She checked the pantry, clicked her tongue at the linens, rearranged the silver drawer Eliza had organized so carefully. At dinner, she sat at the head of the table. Mr. Beaumont returned to his place across from her. When Eliza came in with the dishes, Margaret noticed the way her husband's eyes followed Eliza's arm as she poured the wine. The way his thanks were a shade warmer for her than for the others. In the mornings, Margaret rang the bell and waited to see who would answer. Sometimes it was the younger kitchen girl. Sometimes, when the house was short or Mr. Beaumont had given a sharp order, it was Eliza. The first time Eliza entered the dressing room alone with a basin of water, Mrs. Beaumont set down her brush and turned in her chair. "Close the door," she said. Eliza did. The click sounded loud in the small room. "Come here," Margaret said. Eliza stepped closer and set the basin down. The mirror caught both of them, the mistress in her crisp gown, the servant in plain cloth standing too straight. "How long have you been sleeping in the house?" Margaret asked, as calmly as if she were asking about silver. Eliza's heart jumped. "I sleep near the kitchen, ma'am." "Inside the house," Margaret said. "Not the quarters, not the loft. Under this roof." "How long?" Eliza stared at the basin. "Since late spring, ma'am. Sir wanted someone close in case he needed something at night." "At night," Margaret repeated. Her eyes met Eliza's in the glass. "And what did he need?" The room seemed to tilt. No answer was safe. A lie would insult her. The truth would tear everything open. "Coffee sometimes," Eliza said. "Or the fire tended." Margaret stood. She moved with the controlled grace of a woman taught to never let feelings spill. She crossed the room and caught Eliza's sleeve. "Take that off," she said. Eliza froze. "I want to see your arms," Margaret said. "You think we do not notice, but a woman knows when her bed has been warmed in her absence. She knows when her husband changes. Take it off." Eliza's hands shook as she rolled up her sleeve. Faint bruises marked her arm, fingers pressed too hard. Older shadows lingered higher up, half faded. "The overseer." "No, ma'am," Eliza whispered. "Then who?" The truth burned on Eliza's tongue. "Your husband. The man who calls this our house." She saw the relief in saying it and the danger. Men were believed. She would not be. Eliza rolled her sleeve back down. "I fall sometimes, ma'am," she said, carrying heavy things. Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You think I have never seen marks like that?" she asked quietly. "We learn to hide them." "I'm fine, ma'am," Eliza said, the lie heavy in her mouth. "You're not," Margaret said. "But this is about my house." She turned back to the mirror. "From now on, you sleep in the small room by the linen closet. Door open. If my husband wants something at night, someone else answers. You do not come when he calls after dark. Do you understand?" Eliza said, relief and fear crashing together. "And if he insists," Margaret added softly, "you come to me. I am still mistress here." The rest of the day her orders flowed through the house. Furniture shifted. Curtains changed. A rug Eliza had grown used to vanished into the attic. Margaret placed herself back into every room. Mr. Beaumont watched with a tight jaw. At supper he drank more. His laugh came late. When Eliza refilled his glass, his fingers brushed hers, possessive and brief. Later, in his study, the door closed with a sound that carried through the hall. The argument pushed up through the floorboards, all hard edges and sharp sounds. Eliza couldn't catch every word, but she heard enough. "My house too, Margaret. My name. Dragging her through it like you were dead. You dared." The word slave snapped through the ceiling like a lash. Then second wife was thrown back with clear disgust, as if Margaret had gagged on it the first time she heard it, and had been saving it to spit out again. Eliza sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the linen room, pressing her hands over her ears. Still, the noise slipped through the gaps between her fingers. When the voices finally dropped, the house settled into a tense, waiting quiet. The lamp in the study burned far later than usual. The new rules lasted a few nights. Mr. Beaumont went to bed alone, or so it looked. Eliza stayed in her small room, listening to the creaks of the house as it reshaped itself around the returned mistress. Then the storm arrived. It rolled in from the west one evening, a dark bruise along the horizon that thickened into black clouds and heavy rain. Thunder cracked so close it shook the dishes in the cupboards. Lightning carved white lines through the sky. In the quarters, the enslaved people pressed close together, remembering other storms, other nights when loud weather hid quieter fears. In the big house, shutters slammed. Cold air slipped under doors. The hallway lamp flickered. Eliza lay awake, staring at the low ceiling, every muscle pulled tight. She had never liked storms. As a child, she used to cling to her mother and count the seconds between the flash and the boom, pretending the numbers could keep her safe. Tonight, she counted the gaps between Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont's raised voices instead. The storm outside had stirred something inside them. Words that had simmered under forced politeness now boiled over, loud enough that even the boy in the attic could make out pieces. Duty. Shame. God's order. You and that girl. After a while the words stopped. The house held a long, strained silence. Lightning followed. Then, soft as a step in a dream, Eliza heard her name, Eliza. Her whole body locked. She waited, telling herself she had imagined it. Eliza, the voice came again, closer now, just outside her door. His voice was lower than usual, smoothed by whiskey and stubborn will. She squeezed her eyes shut and prayed he would leave. Mrs. Beaumont's order rang in her head. "You don't answer him after sundown." The floorboard outside the door creaked. Knuckles tapped against the frame. "I know you're in there," he said quietly. "I put you here, remember." She stayed still, breathing shallow. Maybe if she waited, he would think she slept. Maybe he would return to his own room. Maybe the thunder would swallow his voice. The latch turned. The door opened a crack. Hallway light spilled in, drawing a pale line across the floor. His shape filled the opening. "Playing dead, Eliza?" he asked softly. "This is my house, my rules, my arrangements." He stepped inside and closed the door. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Sir," Mrs. Beaumont said, "I know what my wife said." He cut her off. "She forgets whose name paid for these walls." He moved closer, the bed springs groaning as his weight sank onto the narrow mattress. "She thinks she can return after months away and undo what kept this place standing. She's wrong." He reached out. His hand found her in the dark with terrifying ease, fingers tracing her shoulder, the line of her throat. She flinched. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, she'll hear." "She's sleeping off her temper in the next room," he said. "This house has survived worse storms than that." Lightning flashed, briefly outlining his face. In that harsh light, he looked less like a man and more like a pile of wants stacked too long. "She is my wife," he said, as if reminding himself. "By law, by church, by town, that still counts. But you," his hand slid lower, stopping at her ribs, "you're what keeps me from sinking under their rules." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I never asked to be that," she said. "I never asked to choose between hunger and debt either." He snapped softly. "Life doesn't care what we ask, it gives what it gives." Thunder swallowed the last word. The bed frame groaned. Down the hall, behind a closed door, Margaret Beaumont lay awake, staring up at the canopy above her bed. Years with a man whose moods shifted like weather had taught her how to sleep through many things. Tonight she didn't try. She had heard the fight. She had watched him pour one drink after another. She had seen the way his eyes lifted to the ceiling, listening. When the thunder rolled in, she counted heartbeats between flashes like she had as a girl. But her thoughts were not on the sky. They were on the girl in the linen room, on the marks fingers could leave on skin, on the way Thomas had avoided her eyes when she spoke Eliza's name at supper. So when she heard the quiet creak of the floorboard outside her door, she did not move. When his steps passed her room and headed toward the servants' side of the house, something that had been clenched in her for months finally snapped into place. He had not even come to her first. She waited. The house seemed to lean with her, listening. Another board complained. A hinge whispered. Then, faint through the rain, she heard a voice. Not words, just the rhythm of them. His and a softer one answering. She swung her legs out of bed and slid her feet into slippers. Lightning threw her shadow long along the wall. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, her hand resting for a moment on the carved bedpost that held all her old hopes. Then she stepped into the hall. The storm lit the window at the far end, turning the glass white. Between flashes the hall stayed dim under low lamp light. Mr. Beaumont had left their bedroom door half open, a strip of light spilling out like a path. Margaret did not follow it. She followed the sound, the nearly silent murmur of his voice behind another door. The door to the small room she herself had ordered Eliza into. She walked slowly, careful not to let the floor give her away too soon. She knew which boards complained. She had lived on this wood longer than he had. The storm helped hide her breathing, the soft whisper of her nightgown. She reached the doorway just as lightning split the sky, filling the hall with sharp, sudden clarity. Her hand closed around the knob. Inside she heard fabric rustle, the muffled sound of a woman holding back a cry. A man's low assurances that sounded more like ownership than comfort. Thunder rolled. Margaret turned the knob. The door swung inward, and for the first time, The woman whose name was on the deeds and the woman whose body had been treated like a secret room faced each other, not across a table, not in a mirror, but in the same space, under the same roof, in the same wrong place. The door opened on a crack of lightning. For one heartbeat, the scene burned into Eliza's eyes. The narrow bed, the tangled sheet, Mr. Beaumont half in shadow, shirt open, Eliza's dress bunched at her thighs, her hands pushing at his chest without enough strength to stop him. Behind him stood Margaret Beaumont in her nightgown and shawl, hair loose, face carved from something harder than bone. Time bent and snapped at once. "Thomas," she said. Just his ream. No gasp, somehow that made it worse. He jerked upright as if pulled by a hook. "Margaret, get off her," she said calmly. He scrambled back, awkward on the narrow bed. Eliza grabbed the sheet, pulling it over her legs, heat and shame and a sick anger battling inside her. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to stand and shout the truth until it split the storm. Margaret stepped into the room, and the space shrank around her. She did not look at Eliza first. She studied her husband, the open collar, the flush on his neck, the slight sway from drink. "Out," she said. "Now, this is my—" He began. "This is the servants' hall," she cut in, eyes flashing, "and this is my house. You can choose which matters more, but you will not decide it half-dressed in front of her." For a moment Eliza thought he might refuse. His jaw tightened. Then something in Margaret's stare sent him stumbling for the door instead. He brushed past her, muttering, "We'll talk about this." As if it were a small trouble, not an earthquake. "Oh, we will," she said. "In the morning, with clear heads and daylight to show what you've done." He left. The door clicked shut. Outside, the storm softened, as if it too were catching its breath. The small room suddenly felt vast. Two women standing among the ruins of a man's choices. Eliza clutched the sheet tighter. "Mom, stand up," Margaret said. Eliza's legs shook as she obeyed. The sheet slipped and she pulled it to her chest. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. In another life, she might have looked like any young woman caught in a moment that could ruin her. In this one, ruin had always been the beginning. Margaret looked at her fully now, not as part of the house, not as furniture, but as a person who had been in a bed with her husband. "Did he force you?" she asked. The question struck harder than a blow. It carried weight and memory. It came from a woman who understood there were many kinds of force. Eliza swallowed. "He's my master," she said, the words dry and bitter. "I'm not allowed to say no." "That's not what I asked," Margaret said. "I asked if he used his hands, his fists, if he held you down, if he threatened you with the whip." He never needed to. The threat lived in the whole world around them. "He said if I refused, he could sell me south or sell my family," Eliza whispered. "He said this was the better choice in a cruel world." Margaret, she closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were dry and clear. "Of course he did," she said softly. "He's always generous with things that were never his to give." She stepped nearer. Eliza made herself stay still. Mrs. Beaumont lifted her hand, fingers pausing in the air before they touched Eliza's cheek, right where a bruise had not yet appeared. She asked, "How long has he been coming to you like this?" "Since you left." Eliza answered, "At first." Margaret repeated, turning the words over as if examining them. "And after the first," Eliza went on, "said he would keep my family close. He said he wouldn't sell my brother, that he'd let me stay in the house. He called it an arrangement." Margaret made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He would," she said. "He always liked neat words for dirty acts." She let her hand fall. For a moment they simply stood there, a white mistress and a black slave woman, each tied in very different ways to the same man's desires. "You hate me now," Eliza burst out, the thought spilling free. "You'll send me away, back to the fields." Margaret's face changed, pain flickering across it. "I don't have the freedom to hate you, Eliza," she said. "Hate is a sharp blade. It has to be aimed where the law allows, and the law says you are a thing." She spat the last word as if it tasted foul. "It would be easy," she continued in a low voice, "to strike you, to blame you, to call you a temptress, to tell myself you slithered into my bed like a snake and wrapped yourself around my husband. That's what my friends would do. That's what their mothers did, and their mothers before them. It keeps their minds tidy when they kneel in church. Why don't you?" Eliza asked, almost pleading. It would be easier for both of us, because I watched you grow up in this house, Margaret said. I saw your mother carry you in from the sun, your hair full of burrs, your knees scraped raw. I saw you hide under my table when my husband's friends grew loud and crude. I taught you which fork to use. I did not teach you to climb into my marriage bed. She took a steadying breath. He did that. Silence settled between them like fine dust. So what happens now? Eliza asked quietly. Margaret looked around the small room, the narrow bed, the single chair, the shelf with folded linens. A space she had claimed to keep Eliza out of his reach, now revealed as just another kind of cage. Now, she said, I do what women like me have always done. I clean up the mess a man made and pretend it was only spring cleaning. She straightened her shoulders. In the morning, you will leave this room and go back to the small bed off the kitchen. You will not come to the family side of the house after dark unless I send for you. You will not answer if he calls you, no matter how he begs or threatens. You will sleep where other women can hear you. Do you understand? Yes, Mum, Eliza whispered. If he ever forces his way into a room with you again, Margaret continued, you scream. Scream loud enough to wake the cook, the butler, even the boy in the attic. Make so much noise that he cannot pretend it was wanted. Shame is the only language men like him understand. The thought of screaming at him felt like screaming at the sky. Still, something inside Eliza stirred at the idea. And you? Eliza asked. What will you do? Margaret's jaw tightened. I will remind him, in every room and at every meal, whose name is written beside his in the town books and church records. I will remind him whose father helped him buy this land. I will remind him that whatever he tells himself in the dark, in the light he cannot afford to treat his wife like a piece of furniture put away in storage. One corner of her mouth twitched. And I will walk into any room I please, she added, glancing at the bed, especially the ones he thinks are not mine. Eliza studied her then, really studied her. The deep lines beside her mouth, the fine marks around her eyes, carved there by years of smiling when she wanted to scream. You're not going to sell me? She asked softly. Sell you? Margaret echoed. Punish you for being the body he chose because he knew the law would never call it a crime. No, I am not that careless. Relief flooded Eliza so sharply it almost hurt. She sank onto the edge of the bed, but Margaret went on. You will never again mistake his attention for protection. Do you hear me? You are safer in the quarters with 100 eyes than alone in a hallway where his boots echo, Eliza said. Good. Margaret turned to leave, then stopped in the doorway. One more thing. Yes, ma'am. If a child comes of this, Margaret said without turning back. You tell me first, not him? I will decide what story is told in this house about whose baby it is. Cold slid down Eliza's spine. What story would you tell? The only one that keeps it alive, Margaret said, even if that means pretending it belongs to someone else. I would rather raise a lie here than let him sell the truth to the first trader he finds. She stepped into the hall and closed the door. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and raw. Inside, the house shifted around a new understanding. There were now 3 people living inside a marriage meant for 2, and only one of them had any legal power. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Beaumont sulked like a man wounded in pride more than conscience. Twice he tried to corner Eliza in a passage. Both times a door opened nearby, a voice called her name from another room. Once Mrs. Beaumont herself appeared at the top of the stairs with some small task that needed Eliza at once. At dinner, Margaret smiled at her husband before guests, filled his glass, laughed at the right moments. In private, her words were sharp, cutting away his excuses one by one. She did not shout. She did not cry. She did something far more dangerous. She remembered. You told me you could not run this place without me, she said one night in the study, her voice calm. Then you set up a replacement in a linen room. That's not fair, he muttered. Fair, she repeated. You want to speak of fair. Let's begin with how many choices she had compared to you. He could not stand the mirror she held up. Men like him rarely could. He drank more. He spent more nights in town. Sometimes he returned smelling of perfume that was not kept under his own roof. Eliza's world shrank to kitchens and corridors. She moved like a shadow between stove and pantry, careful never to be alone long enough for the past to repeat itself. Sometimes, when she passed the mistress in the hall, their eyes met for a brief second, long enough for a quiet, bitter understanding to pass between them. When the signs came, the morning sickness, the heavy feeling low in her belly, Eliza tried to pretend it was nothing. Bad food, too much bending over the wash, anything but what Leahy the midwife saw at once. "You carrying?" Leahy asked one mild afternoon, her hands firm on Eliza's wrist. "You know whose it is?" Eliza laughed, a short, empty sound. "The law says everything on this place belongs to him," she said. "That includes whatever grows inside me." Hannah, older now and slower but still working in the house. "Law can say what it wants," she muttered. "That baby will hear your heartbeat first, not his." Eliza swallowed. "Does it matter?" she asked. "If he can sell it either way." Hannah hesitated. "You told Miss Margaret?" she asked. Eliza shook her head, fear tightening her throat. "She said I should," she murmured. "Said she'd choose the story." "Then you best let her start telling it," Hannah said, "before he makes one up himself." That evening, after the table was cleared and the silver put away, Eliza stood outside the parlor door, her hands damp, her heart pounding. Mrs. Beaumont sat by the fire with embroidery in her lap, spectacles balanced on her nose. She looked up as Eliza's shadow crossed the doorway. "Yes," she said. "Mom," Eliza began, her voice barely sound. "There's something you asked me to tell you first, if it ever happened." Margaret set down her needle. "Come in," she said. "Close the door." Eliza did. The click of the latch sounded final. She did not need to say the word. Margaret's eyes dropped to her still flat belly, then returned to her face. "How far along?" she asked. "Leahy says not long," Eliza said. "Weeks, maybe." Her hands twisted in her apron. "I can stop it if you want. Leahy knows herbs. Other women have done it." The idea hung between them like smoke. "No," Margaret said sharply. "No more dying in this house than we can prevent." "Enough without our help, then what?" Eliza whispered. "He'll see. He'll know. He'll suspect," Margaret corrected. "Suspicion is not proof. Proof is what men like Pike trade in. Suspicion is what we survive on." She stood and crossed to the writing desk in the corner. From a drawer she took out a small book, the household ledger that listed flowers, candles, and shoes, not human lives. She opened it to a clean page. "What are you doing, ma'am?" Eliza asked. "What I do best," Margaret replied. "Putting things where they belong." She dipped her pen and wrote in neat, steady letters. "Child to be born to house servant Eliza, to be recorded as the issue of stable hand Joseph." Eliza stared. "Joseph," she said. "He's never touched me. He won't deny it if I tell him not to," Margaret said. "He owes me 2 favors," and his back spared from the lash. "The town will accept it. They already believe your people fall together like puppies when no one is watching." Eliza flinched at the words, knowing who they truly cut. "And Mr. Beaumont?" she asked. Margaret's hand tightened around the pen. "He will suspect," she said again. "He will count the months and study that child's face. But if he calls his wife a liar in public, he will have to stand in church and explain why he was ever in your bed." She blotted the ink and blew on it. "He will not," she said. "Men like him would sooner choke on the secrets inside them than let even a breath of truth slip out in front of other men. So the baby stays?" Eliza asked quietly. "The baby stays," Margaret said. "In this house, but not as his heir, not as another second anything. The child will stay as a servant's child, with a stable boy named as her father, at least to the eyes of anyone who dares to ask." Tears ran down Eliza's cheeks. Before she could stop them, she lifted her hands and pressed them hard against her face. "You are crying," Margaret said, her voice not sharp, not cruel, "because that sounds so small to you, does it not? Not freedom, not a fresh start somewhere far north, just another child dressed in livery living under another person's roof." Eliza shook her head slowly. "I am crying," she said roughly, her voice worn thin, "because it is more than I ever thought I would be allowed to have." They stood there, 2 women holding different ends of the same fragile mercy, afraid to pull too hard. Later, when the child came into the world, she was a little girl with skin the color of late summer and eyes that held far too much of Mr. Beaumont's shape within them. Margaret cleared her throat and was the first white person to lift the baby into her arms. She held her carefully, studying the small, serious face as if it might speak back. "We will call her Anna," she said. "It is a good steady name. It could belong to anyone at all." Eliza, worn out and shaking, watched from the bed. Will you love her?" she asked, surprising even herself with the question. Margaret's mouth drew tight for a moment. "I will keep her alive," she said. "I will not sell her. I will not allow him to plan her future to suit his comfort. Sometimes, in this world, that is the only kind of love we are ever allowed to claim as ours." When Mr. Beaumont saw the baby for the first time, his face shifted through 3 expressions so quickly that Eliza almost missed them. Recognition, then denial, and then something close to regret, twisted sharp with resentment. "She looks like someone," he muttered. "Joseph, obviously," Margaret said smoothly. "You can see it around the mouth." He looked at his wife. She returned his stare without blinking, the ledger with its careful lie resting safely inside her desk. He could have argued. He could have raised his voice. He could have shouted, "She is mine," loud enough to shatter the thin story his wife had built. He did not. Pride, fear, and long habit closed around his throat and held the words back. If anyone in town ever asked, the story stayed simple. That one, the little girl near the corner. She belongs to the stable hand and the house servant. Good with her hands, that child, quick and quiet. Years later, when Anna had grown tall enough to light the lamps without standing on a stool, she would sometimes catch her mother watching her with a look full of grief and something harder still. "Why do you look at me that way?" Anna would ask. "Just counting," Eliza would say. "Counting what?" "Counting how many nights you have slept in the same bed," Eliza would answer. "How many mornings you have woken in the same house. How many days have passed without your name being written on someone's list." In the end, there was nothing in any law book that named Eliza a second wife. No marriage paper, no church record, no line in the plantation books. On paper, she was what she had always been. Female, age approximate, house servant. The child was listed as Joseph's. Mrs. Beaumont was the wife. Mr. Beaumont, the master. The house remained whole. The only place the truth lived was in the memories of women. Passed in whispers over washed tubs, in the steady hands of midwives, in quiet nights when storms rolled in and someone lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps in the hall. No clerk ever wrote that the master used his slave as a second wife. And when the real wife entered the room, the only thing that saved the child they had made was the story she chose to tell. That part survives now only in stories like this one, spoken long after the house has fallen apart and the ledgers have turned to dust.